Otskara, welcome to the channel. My name is Stagfu. I will be your host this evening. Now, in this channel, we're going to be going through programming and making small applications to help you learn a bit more, try a few new things, and think outside the box. So, just a little bit about me before we get into the video. As I mentioned before, my screen name is Stagfu. I am from Australia, but I'm currently living in Tokyo. I've been a developer for about 10 years, and I love building very small applications for fun and profit. In this video, we're going to be going through my personal boilerplate, Chum-bucket. If you're not sure what Chum-bucket is, chum is meat that you use to attract sharks and other meat-eating fish. So if you want to see if an idea works really quickly, you can chum the water, so to speak, where you throw in the meat, see if anything comes. So that's the idea of this boilerplate, is to make apps really fast in a intuitive and non-complicated way. Okay, so let's jump into the index page, and I'll just go through the imports, and then I'll go through each of the functions on the page. So we got a couple of imports here, most of them local. We got reducers from our store, which will go through when we get to the function. We got start router, which is our page.js router. We got hydrate and dehydrate. The state, which saves our immutable state object into the local storage, which allows us to have a little bit of longevity between people coming to the app and leaving the app. Feels like more like an application. Create store, which is creating our immutable store. Our app root, which is our UI, and the base styles function to render our JSS styles. We also have the morph from nanomorph. So nanomorph goes along with nanohtml, which is the view library that we're going to be using inside the UI. So we've got root node, which is the app. Pretty straightforward entry point, like React, and that's going to be passed down to our renderer here, which will render our UI into our root node using a real DOM diffing algorithm, which is very fast. There's some more specs here as well. This will just check if the DOMs are equal, and if they're not, it will re-render that UI element. But if they are, then it will do nothing, which just gives it a little bit of speed. Now we have the default state. Like I said, it goes to hydrate state, which we'll just jump into, which checks the local storage item. Default is Chum-bucket storage, and it will try and get it out of the state, because this can, for whatever reason, this can sometimes fail, and that will return the state. If it does, return the default state. If there is no key, then return the default state. And that's for the first. This is for the first render. And then dehydrate is basically taking the store and then chucking it into the local storage, stringified. Pretty straightforward. Now we come to our state function here using the create store. The create store from vuejs will take a default object, which it will create that proxy from, and then it will take a object of functions. These will run every time the state is updated, kind of like watch functions in some of the other state libraries. Now we have, and then reducers is all of the reducers which are allowed to mutate this proxy. Now down here we've got our start routers, which is the page.js stuff, and it just starts page.js, If you're not familiar with vuejs, there'll be links in the description. Base styles, which will load in our CSS. And then the service worker, which will allow us to install our application. Okay, so that's our entry point. I'll have links to all the libraries as well in the description. But let's go into the next file. I think we should start with the store. Okay, so we're taking in this function reducer. I think everyone should read a bucket. It's not too complicated to read. It's quite a small file, but I can also do a video about it. But this reducer function essentially is just a fancy promise which wraps some of the proxy logic inside a promise so that it returns nicely, to make it a bit simpler down here. But a bucket really only has those two functions, the create store and the reducer. And now we have our default state. There's not so much typing because I think people can write their own types afterwards. It's going to be much faster instead of having to delete all typing, start all over again. So here we have our greeting, which is going to be our meet, the create, the current page, the home page, active page, and then we've got notifications. And after we do this store, I'll boot up the application and we can see what it looks like, just to give a bit more context before we move forward. So that's our default store. We've got our active pages. This is for just coloring of the navbars. In the reducer, here, we are taking in the state and the new value that's being passed, and then we're setting that new value here, safely mutating it inside this reducer. So we've got the update greeting, which is what we'll be doing, updating this greeting, and then the update notifications to show a little notification toast. So I'll boot up the application and then we can have a look-see of how it's going to look. Okay, so that's now running. Jump into a browser, and we'll give it a refresh. And we can see here, let me go to my application just to make sure and clear all of my workers and stuff, so I don't have any issues with that. And we've got here the workbox is running, with there is install events, and we have the Webpack live server running. And here it's loaded in my default application storage from localhost. So if I refresh there, we'll get back our natural meat that we should have before. Yep. Let me just check everything. Yeah. So that's looking pretty normal, pretty what we expect right now. If I click this, it adds meat. When I go to the example, there's our little toast, and it loads in the sharks inside the greeter. When I go back, the sharks are still there, and I can chum the water again. It's a very basic application with just a little bit of data collection and updating the state using actions. And with this sort of setup, it's pretty good to go on to the next application. So I think it's a pretty good starting point to use what's here to build any application, because you have those actions, and you have the router, and you have network calls. So that's the store. Let me jump back to code. This is the that's the store done, and I think from here we're gonna go to the actions, and we can have a look at that reducer. And actions is completely empty except for one, which has that little meat thing here that I showed just previously. We have the state, and then we have this private function with the update greeting. And this update greeting is the name inside our store. Update greeting right here. So it's that simple. You put in your text value, and then you have your the new value that's gonna go into that reducer. So that's a very basic action. We've got the handle greeting, which is then used inside the UI on the button, and it does one single state update. That state then listens to that then triggers this re-render, this one, which does the DOM diffing and then re-renders the page. Not the whole page, but anything that's changed. So that's pretty simple. Let's go on to URL next. And we have some basic styling here for page, just for the context. Then we've got handlers for each route, the route itself here. And then we have the route start that I mentioned before. I also have a very small function to collect data from the network. And instead of using an API, it's just using a single JSON file. Just keep things simple. You're probably going to replace this anyway whenever you do any sort of API call. But this will give you an example of how you can call it in a safe way while updating the store. Let's go through each route. Got the home page, which resets the notifications and sets the current page to be home page, and that will be used inside a UI. We've got the example fetch, which does that get data call. This name is not being used anymore, but it can be passed into this JSON if you want to call any particular. I'll add a fix me here. So I'll push that up after the video. So we're going to do get, we'll get data, and then that will hopefully return if everything is fine. It will be fine because it's just a file inside our dist folder, which I can show you too. So dist folder is like that. We have our data, and that's our sharks that is loading. So back to our URL file. Then once it's got that data, it's pasting it inside the update greeting, changing the page, and then it's adding that nice little toast at the bottom with a little timeout to disable it. Home page, yep, and then this is applying those functions to each route. I like big capitals for these because I think they're important and they're static values. So this will essentially be a really long list of all your different routes, and you can add in, definitely read it up on page.js, but you can add in parameters and things like that if you need to pass them into your functions. So again, a kind of bare bones little router here, but very, very easy to understand and jump off from. Basically just got a route and then a function that runs on that route. That simple. And that's why I love it. Alright, next one is going to be we already went through utils, those two functions. We already gone through actions, store. So I think it's probably time we'll do styles. Now here we have a lot of time when we do styles, we want to have that sort of design system feel and keep all of the variables together. I've seen a couple of libraries around, but at the end of the day they just end up being a big object with some helper functions attached. I just included the big object, ds for design system, and then I use these variables inside my styles down here. Now I have this package called Juro. It's a very, very basic package. I have another package called Fairbread, which is more focused on JSS styles, but this one is even simpler than that. It is a registry of strings that have been loaded onto the page. So we'll go through this thing and then I'll show you inside the code once it's rendered. Right now I have button styles, which is a function which returns a string with these variables here. Notification styles, which is added to the registry I just talked about. And then I have base styles, which is of course running that function here, and base styles, which is being registered as base styles. Now this is not JSS. These are just strings. We're using backticks, native backticks, and passing in those variables when I need to use those variables. And that's it. It's very, very basic and very, very nice in my opinion. I really don't like things like Sass and less anymore. I have some articles on Medium as well about that. I think that local bindings and different languages for just achieving those sort of things is not useful, especially in JavaScript, because you can already do so much with just string manipulation in JavaScript. Not much reason to learn a new language just to do string manipulation inside a language which already does really good string manipulation. Okay, so let's jump into the code, into the browser, and we can see what Juro is creating inside our application. A lot of icons for the PWA stuff. If we come down here, we've got these two, make it a little bit bigger. We've got these two tags here, base styles and notification styles. If we open them up, they are just the very basic strings that we were looking at before with the variables rendered inside them. So when the application loads, it loads base styles, as we saw in the index, which puts that style tag into the header. Then the page loads the rest of the application, and it's applied, which is lightning fast. The only sort of flash you get is from, you see the space styles inside the index. The only flash you sort of get in the browser is from the fonts, and you get them normally anyway. Which, I mean, you can hide that with a very basic fade on the body as well. But that is Juro, and I really like this for the next reason, which we will see in UI. Okay, let's jump back into the UI then. I'm going to go to the very top. So we've got our basic imports up here, our nano HTML, which is our view layer, which renders our things here for the morph DOM. So this will return a template, a HTML template, if I remember correctly, and then the morph DOM can use that to do very, very fast diffing on the front end. This app root has basic navbar, routing, notifications. Inside the routing, we have that string value from the store that we saw earlier, home, and that's just as a switching case of those different values, and which it does the diff on very fast and very straightforward. And I mean, you can move these into functions once your app gets larger, but I find that it's quite easy, just how it is. And these all work off that global state. They all receive the state, and they all work off that state. And that's pretty great. If you need local state, you can switch this to nano components. I haven't had to do that too much for the kind of size of the apps that I'm making. If you really, really need to do that, you can do that. I'm also not that big a fan of individual states. I think it's very messy. In the README, I talk about making sure that data equals view for this global store. And if you have multiple states, it means that the data inside your global state does not equal the view that you're showing. It kind of equals the view that you're showing, and then things get kind of messy when you have that sort of paradigm, in my opinion. Bit off topic there, but we've done our navbar, and now we have the notification styles. And you can see in the notification styles we have that function notification styles inside the notification component, and then it's rendering the HTML. And we saw in the browser before that notification style renders a tag inside the header. And the reason I made this this library Jura is so I could have these very basic HTML components, and it just adds any CSS that it needs at the time. And if it's there, it doesn't rerun the function, it leaves it. And if it's not there, then it will add it, which means that you can have these little CSS snippets being added one by one slowly as people load individual components onto the page, as opposed to something like CSS, where you load a big one, you load a big CSS file, and people might not even see any of those components. So I think there's pros and cons of every approach, but with this approach I find that I personally like it a bit better, and it allows me to do my CSS in JavaScript very easy and very neatly. So that's what I like. You can remove this, you can put in emotion or whatever you want, but yeah, this works for me most of the time, and it's fast. It's not slow. I haven't really had any issues with it being incredibly slow. You could argue that if you cache the CSS, it will be faster, but at the end of the day, when you're adding a new components to the DOM, it has to run the CSS styling again. It has to run that function again, so you're going to be running almost exactly the same amount of functions, regardless of whether you're getting the string from the network or from the or if it's being dynamically added by this function. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I can put some links in the description about the CSS OM, which is how the browser deals with the CSS when it's loaded into the page, and like what sort of mechanisms happen when they do that. I also have a small article on Medium about that as well. Yeah, so I think that is everything. We went through the UI, we went through the styles, we went through the store, index, actions, URLs, and utils. I'll do a quick rundown of the other function, the other files. We have here our now.js, which lets you deploy it directly to Now, which is a free service for hosting your website. You can also hook it up to GitHub Actions, and it will just deploy it directly and have really fast deployment that way. Inside the Webpack, I have a basic setup of the Workbox plugin for your what's it called? For your service workers. And inside the package JSON, there is you also notice in the Webpack, because I don't have any fancy styles or interpreters, I literally just have one rule, which is awesome TypeScript loader, and everything runs through TypeScript, and that's it. That's my one rule. Done. So I'll go back to our scripts. We have the start, Webpack dev server. We've got a build, which builds it for into the dist folder. We have PWA, which would generate your icons. I don't think that's meant to be there. Leave that too. Which has the favicons, the icons, the launch screens, which will let you generate all these files, because there is quite a lot of files. I have a little readme here. Put all the files you want to generate inside this, and inside the package it's looking for an icon and a splash screen. I might expand on this and make a script, but for now it's just a very simple way to generate the icons you need. And it also generates a manifest, but there's also a manifest already inside here with all the information and the coloring and theming to install it. We also have an index file, which has a lot of the icon information for PWA, including some theme coloring as well to color the browser, and some very, very basic styling for the application. It's by default mobile application, and this just means that it's going to be mobile on desktop, so feel free to remove any of that stuff. But for me, I do a majority of little phone applications or little desktop applications, so not a big deal. Yeah, so I think that is the main structure of Chum-bucket. Okay, so that was the introduction to Chum-bucket. I will include links in the description for you to check out the code, and you can follow along with me in the video, and links to some of those libraries and points that we discussed. The next video will be making a very small application inside Chum-bucket. I've done some designs up in Figma, and we'll go over that next time. I hope you enjoyed my explanation, and I hope those libraries seem useful. If you're interested, check them out. But Jane Wani, and I'll see you guys next time.